Imagine a country more crowded than Tokyo's subway at rush hour, more chaotic than any place your mind can conceive. A nation where 173 million people live, crammed into a space half the size of Italy. Extreme, impossible density. Imagine workers dismantling gigantic ships with bare hands, 5-year-old children working 10 hours a day in factories. Imagine rivers flowing completely black, air so polluted that breathing shortens your life. A hell hidden from the world's eyes. Welcome to Bangladesh, the country the world doesn't want to see, the reality nobody tells, the truth hidden behind statistics. 173 million people in 58,000 square miles. Do the math, 1,150 people per square mile. London seems empty in comparison. From Dhaka to Chittagong, overcrowding is everywhere. Human pressure crushes everything. Personal space doesn't even exist as a concept. Here, your designer shirts are sewn by women who earn $3 a day, working 14 hours exposed to poisons without protection. Here, the world's largest ship graveyard swallows human lives every day. Barefoot workers dismantle giant oil tankers with hammers and hope. Here, nearly 5 million children don't go to school but work in inhumane conditions, stealing their childhood forever. Damned! This isn't a tourist documentary with exotic temples and picturesque markets. This is a brutal immersion into the planet's most extreme reality. If you want to see the real Bangladesh, not the postcard version, hit like and subscribe, because what you're about to discover is shocking. Let's go right now. 15. The hygiene crisis beyond all imagination. Bangladesh, South Asia, a flat country formed by the Ganges River. Over 700 rivers flow through the territory, shaping lives and landscapes daily. 58,000 square miles, 173 million inhabitants, one of the most densely populated places on planet Earth, extreme overcrowding everywhere. Street food, improvised stalls on every corner serve pitha, fuchka, chatpati to millions of hungry customers every single day. But dishes are washed in buckets of dirty water, sometimes the same water flowing in open sewers along the sidewalks. Food remains exposed under the scorching sun, covered in flies, ingredients prepared a few yards from raw, stinking sewage water. In rural areas, families eat insects, locusts, cockroaches, not for culinary choice but from desperate hunger when any other protein is lacking. Some drink fresh goat blood, eat raw animal liver, convinced this will give physical strength, superhuman resistance, pure superstition. These practices aren't picturesque traditions, they're the brutal reality of chronic hunger afflicting millions of Bangladeshis every single day. 14. The hidden cost of your designer clothes. Every time you wear a Zara, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Burberry or Prada shirt, there's a high probability it was sewn in Bangladesh. Extreme exploitation. The country is one of the world's largest clothing exporters. Global brands flock here for one reason: incredibly cheap labor. But cheap for whom? Workers endure shifts of 12, 14 consecutive hours in conditions completely illegal in Western countries. They handle extremely dangerous chemicals without protective equipment, work in buildings with terrible ventilation, constant exposure to toxic, carcinogenic dyes. The result is devastating. Many female workers don't live past 50 due to continuous chemical exposure, guaranteed premature death. The workforce is predominantly young women, many under 25, leaving poor villages hoping for better lives in industrial cities. Instead, they find themselves trapped in an endless cycle of exploitation. Wages too low to save, non-transferable skills, no escape route. Returning to the village means admitting failure. Losing face before family that depends on their meager wages to survive daily. 13. The world's most dangerous ship graveyard. If you thought textile work was dangerous, wait until you hear what happens in Chittagong, home to the world's largest ship graveyard. Here, enormous cargo ships, giant oil tankers are dismantled piece by piece in the most dangerous job existing on planet Earth, absolute. Imagine ocean vessels literally torn apart almost entirely by hand by workers without adequate training, without basic safety protections. Workers without equipment handle heavy toxic metals, dangerous chemical waste, even radioactive materials daily without knowing what they're actually touching. They use rudimentary tools, hammers, pickaxes, oxyacetylene torches, to dismantle ships built to withstand the world's worst ocean storms. Most come from extremely poor rural areas, attracted by promises of stable employment, but the reality is brutally merciless beyond imagination. Minimal wages barely sufficient to survive, exhausting hours often exceeding 12 hours daily, no legal protections for workers, zero. They regularly suffer from chronic respiratory problems, severe chemical burns, heavy metal exposure diseases. Many don't know what they're really handling. The environmental damage is equally devastating. Toxic materials pollute the sea, hitting entire coastal communities that depend on fishing to survive. 12. The invisible men of the sewers. In the underground depths of cities, thousands of workers perform the most dangerous, degrading job imaginable, cleaning sewers manually with bare hands. These men, known as manual scavengers, enter manholes and drainage systems without absolutely any safety equipment, nothing, no protection. They work in total darkness, surrounded by human waste, lethal toxic gases, deadly diseases floating in the putrid, fetid sewer water. The tools are basic plastic buckets, rudimentary shovels, their hands completely bare, immersed directly in human fecal sewage. They face constant risk of suffocation from methane gas, drowning in wastewater, contracting potentially fatal bacterial infections. Despite performing absolutely vital work to allow cities like Dhaka to function minimally, they earn less than a few dollars daily. The most heartbreaking part, this medieval practice continues because Bangladesh lacks modern infrastructure and the political will necessary to modernize sanitary systems. While other countries use specialized machines and rigorous safety protocols, these workers literally risk their lives every single day, always. Many die every year, suffocated by gases, drowned, killed by infections, but official statistics don't exist. Nobody tracks the deaths. 11. Childhood stolen by necessity. Imagine being 5 years old. Instead of playing with toys and learning to read, you must work 10-hour shifts in a brick kiln. This is the daily reality for approximately 4.7 million Bangladeshi children between 5 and 14 years old, according to the most conservative available estimates. They work in textile factories handling dangerous chemicals, in brick kilns exposed to extreme heat, as domestic workers without protection. They work longer hours than many adults, often more than 10 hours daily, for wages less than half what an adult would earn. This isn't simply about poverty forcing families into difficult choices. This is a system that systematically exploits the most vulnerable members. These children should be in schools learning skills that could break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. Instead, they're trapped, damned, trapped in jobs that seriously damage physical and mental health, completely block cognitive and educational development, mathematically guarantee they'll remain poor. Many develop chronic respiratory problems, skeletal deformities from heavy labor, permanent psychological trauma. They'll never have opportunities for better lives. Stolen childhood never recovers. The windows of brain development closed during childhood remain closed forever. Permanent damage. 10. The air that slowly kills. Take a deep breath right now. In Bangladesh, that simple natural act could literally shorten your life expectancy by years. The country consistently ranks among the world's worst for air quality. Dhaka regularly competes for the title of most polluted city. Vehicle emissions from millions of poorly maintained cars and buses, unregulated industries pumping chemicals, continuous garbage burning, dust. Everything combines creating air that's more poison than oxygen. Breathing here means slowly poisoning yourself. Every single breath damages lungs. During winter months, when rainfall is scarce, Dhaka disappears completely under a dense blanket of smog, so thick you can barely see buildings across the street. To put it in perspective, there are days when Dhaka wins the world record as most polluted city, even surpassing Delhi, Beijing, Lahore. The human cost is staggering, terrifying. Air pollution causes over 150,000 premature deaths annually in Bangladesh alone. Every year, thousands. Respiratory diseases like asthma, chronic bronchitis, lung infections have become epidemic, especially affecting children and elderly. Hospitals always overcrowded and full. Children growing up breathing this toxic air develop smaller, less efficient lungs, have lower academic performance, accumulate permanent damage. 9. Transportation that defies logic. If you think your daily commute is difficult, wait until you see 173 million people moving simultaneously. Total chaos. Buses and trucks decades old, held together more by hope than maintenance, crammed with passengers well beyond any reasonable capacity. We're not talking about a few extra people standing. We're talking about passengers literally hanging from open doors, sitting on the roof. Pedal rickshaws, emaciated men pedaling, transporting loads weighing 3 times their body weight through suffocating 104°C heat. They sweat copiously, losing gallons of fluids every day, their bodies prematurely consumed under extreme constant physical effort. Early death. Many rickshaw drivers don't reach 50. The work literally destroys their bodies. Heart problems, ruined knees, deformed backs. Traffic in cities is pure chaos with no apparent rules. Motorcycles zoom the wrong way. Pedestrians cross everywhere. Animals block streets. Nobody respects anything. Traffic accidents kill thousands of people every year, but official statistics are largely underestimated. Nobody really counts the actual deaths. Traveling from one point to another in the city can take hours for distances that elsewhere would be covered in 20 minutes. Wasted productivity. Eight. Constant and predictable natural disasters. Bangladesh is geographically cursed. It's located in one of the planet's most vulnerable zones to combined natural disasters: storms, floods, devastation. Devastating cyclones regularly hit the coast, causing catastrophic floods that kill thousands of people, destroy crops, and contaminate water reserves. The country is so flat and close to sea level that even minimal ocean increases cause massive flooding of inhabited territories. Annual monsoon floods regularly submerge 1/3 of the entire national territory. Houses swept away, infrastructure collapses, diseases spread rapidly. People are forced to live weeks or months in overcrowded temporary shelters, lacking basic sanitation services, adequate food, medical assistance. Children lose months of school. Families lose all their possessions. Entire communities are forcibly displaced without possibility of returning home. Climate change is drastically worsening the situation. More intense cyclones, accelerated sea level rise, more irregular, unpredictable precipitation. Scientists predict that by 2050, millions of Bangladeshis could be forced to migrate because coastal lands will become permanently uninhabitable, submerged. This will be one of the largest climate migrations in human history, but the world is absolutely unprepared to welcome these refugees. 7. Child marriage that steals the future. Despite being officially illegal, Bangladesh has one of the world's highest rates of child marriage. Nearly 59% of girls married before 18. Nearly 59% of girls marry before turning 18, many even before 15. Devastating family impositions. These aren't free choices, but impositions based on extreme poverty, entrenched patriarchal traditions, desire to reduce mouths to feed, burden. Poor families see daughters as economic burdens to eliminate as quickly as possible. Get rid of the weight, dump it on other men. Once married very young, these girls face extremely dangerous early pregnancies, bodies not yet fully developed to give birth safely. Bangladesh has very high maternal and infant mortality rates directly linked to adolescent pregnancies. Complications during childbirth and pregnancy kill thousands of girls. Marrying as children means completely abandoning education. Child brides rarely return to school after marriage, losing any opportunity to develop skills. They remain trapped in often abusive marriages without possibility of escape, completely dependent on husbands, perpetuating the cycle of poverty and submission. Their children, born to malnourished, uneducated child mothers, have much higher probabilities of dying in infancy or developing permanent disabilities. 6. The corruption that devours every resource. Bangladesh loses billions of dollars every year due to systemic corruption permeating every level of government and society. Public officials demand bribes for basic services that should be free. Police extort money instead of protecting citizens. Judges sell verdicts. This omnipresent corruption drains resources that could build schools, hospitals, functioning sanitary infrastructure. Instead, they end up in corrupt politicians' pockets and allies. International aid destined for development projects often ends up in corrupt politicians' pockets, while projects remain unfinished or useless. Roads that collapse after a few months because asphalt was diluted, hospitals without medicine because funds were stolen, schools without qualified teachers. The population knows perfectly well the system is rotten, but feels completely powerless. Nobody can do anything against consolidated power. Those who denounce corruption risk violent retaliation. Investigative journalists are threatened and killed. Anti-corruption activists end up in prison on invented charges. This creates a climate of fear and resignation, where people simply accept corruption as an inevitable part of daily life. No hope for change. Meanwhile, the rich get richer, stealing from public coffers, while the poor sink deeper into desperate, hopeless misery. 5. Floating markets that defy logic. In a country dominated by water, completely floating markets have emerged where entire commercial communities operate exclusively on boats, river economy. Vendors arrive before dawn with boats loaded with fresh fruit, vegetables, freshly caught fish, household goods. Buyers navigate among vessels and boats. These markets aren't picturesque tourist attractions, but essential lifelines for communities that have no other access to goods and services. Farmers and fishermen living in remote areas depend completely on these markets to sell products and buy necessities, the only connection with the economy. For many families, the floating market represents the only connection with the broader economy. Without it, they'd be completely isolated, unable to survive. The vendors themselves often live permanently on their boats, transforming markets not just into commercial spaces, but into real floating neighborhoods. Children grow up on these boats, learning to swim before walking, developing skills that allow them to navigate a world where water is everything. However, these markets face existential threats. River pollution makes water increasingly dangerous. Climate change brings more frequent floods that destroy. Many traditional markets are disappearing. Rivers too polluted to support commerce. Communities forced to relocate due to devastating environmental changes. 4. Rivers that now bring death. Bangladesh's rivers were once arteries of civilization, providing fresh water, transportation, food, fertile soil for agriculture, life and prosperity. Today, many of these same rivers have become toxic streams, threatening the communities they once sustained, complete devastating transformation. Imagine rivers flowing completely black, with surfaces covered in industrial foam, floating debris. The water emits such a strong chemical smell. People cover their faces when crossing bridges overhead. The fish that once fed millions of families have disappeared completely. Water so polluted that even touching it can cause skin irritations and serious infections. This didn't happen suddenly, but gradually over time. Factories treated rivers as free waste disposal systems, dumping chemicals, dyes, industrial byproducts directly into water without treatment. Cities and villages followed suit, using rivers as open sewers for human waste and household garbage. The cumulative effect has been catastrophic and devastating. Communities that depended on fishing for food and income have seen their livelihoods vanish completely. Families who fished for generations now face ruin. Many have been forced to migrate to overcrowded cities, adding to urban problems while abandoning their traditional communities forever. 3. Traditions that maintain order in chaos. In a country facing overwhelming modern challenges, traditional customs and etiquette might seem irrelevant, but they represent something deeper. They're survival mechanisms that help 173 million people coexist in one of the world's most crowded and difficult environments. Public displays of affection, even between married couples, are strictly prohibited. This isn't just about religious conservatism or cultural tradition, but necessity. In a society where personal space is virtually non-existent and privacy is a luxury few can afford, these rules help maintain harmony. When people are forced to live in such constant physical proximity, rigid social boundaries become essential to prevent continuous violent conflicts. Dress codes are equally important, strictly enforced through constant social pressure. Modest clothing isn't just about religious observance but respect. Even something apparently simple like littering takes on greater significance in cities already overwhelmed by waste management challenges, throwing trash around. Social pressure against uncivil behavior represents communities trying to maintain some level of cleanliness and dignity despite crushing devastating systemic failures. These customs may seem restrictive to outsiders, but they serve crucial functions in a society under extreme stress, providing predictable frameworks that help maintain order. 2. The population density that crushes the soul. 173 million people live crammed into 58,000 square miles. Do the math, it means over 1,150 people per square mile on average. In cities, the density reaches completely mind-boggling levels. In Dhaka, over 23,000 people live per square mile in some areas. Extreme overcrowding. Imagine never having a moment of true solitude, constantly hearing voices, noises, smells of neighbors through extremely thin walls, shared services. Personal space is a completely alien concept. In urban slums, entire families of 6 to 8 people live in single rooms of 100 square feet, where they sleep, cook, eat, attempt to maintain basic human dignity. Children grow up never knowing what it means to have a private corner all their own. Adults never have real marital intimacy. Elderly die surrounded by strangers because there's literally no space for privacy, even in death. This extreme density creates enormous psychological tensions. Studies show chronic overcrowding drastically increases domestic violence, mental illness, devastating antisocial behavior. People develop coping mechanisms to tolerate total lack of personal space, but the psychological cost remains devastating. Constant pressure never relieved. The constant pressure of too many bodies in too little space generates an atmosphere of permanent claustrophobia, permeating every aspect of life. Constant stress. 1. The resilience that defies all logic. After everything we've explored, the biggest question remains. How do 173 million people wake up every morning and find ways to survive, work, love, build communities despite facing challenges that would overwhelm most modern societies in the developed world? The answer lies in almost incomprehensible human resilience and community solidarity systems that have evolved over generations of suffering. In Bangladesh, you'll see families sharing their last handful of rice with even poorer neighbors, communities spontaneously organizing to help each other during natural disasters, without waiting for government help that might never arrive, workers creating informal cooperatives to protect themselves from exploitation. This solidarity is an idealized romanticism, but practical survival strategy. They know tomorrow they might be the ones in need, so they build networks of reciprocity that function when everything else collapses. The same floating markets, improvised transportation networks, informal economic systems represent extraordinary human ingenuity applied to impossible problems. When formal institutions fail completely, people create alternative solutions that shouldn't work but do because the alternative is dying. Bangladesh simultaneously shows the worst and best of human nature. Systemic failures creating suffering, but also determination and creativity, producing miraculous solutions against all possible odds. And you? Which of these 15 truths surprised you most? Did you think Bangladesh was different? Write it in the comments. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. See you at the next destination. And remember, every country is more complex than it seems.